You fool! Warren is dead.
Welcome to HorrorBabble. I'm pleased to present a brand new offering from the elusive MD Vickers today, The Haunted Locker. At a vast mail depot in the industrial north, a weary night worker's delight in acquiring a long-coveted locker gives way to a quiet and intolerable dread. See the description below for a link to the Vickers playlist. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Please leave them below. And without further ado, The Haunted Locker by M.D. Vickers. So, Martin Hudson eventually got his locker at the Royal Mail Northwest Super Hub, and he was over the moon. Sounds over the top, doesn't it? But I can tell you, when you don't have a locker, you don't half miss it. They're just so damn useful. It was only through dogged persistence that he finally received it. He was a late arrival, and they'd all been taken up, so he put a request in for one about 6 months prior. And now here he was standing in front of it, key in hand, with a big beam on his face, and a bag full of stuff ready to put neatly in it. He was told by a driver that a few of the old-timers at the rail terminal had said the locker had belonged to a certain John Gartland, the rail terminal apparently being where it had arrived from. Gartland wasn't portrayed as a particularly nice fellow, and quite the opposite. He'd passed away a few months ago, and all his possessions had been removed from the locker by a relative. By all accounts, he'd had really bad OCD, which had been a bit of a running joke amongst his colleagues, mainly behind his back. A big drinker, he'd come in on early shift and be in a foul mood till about dinner time, when the hangover would wear off. Always around his locker, he would repeatedly tap the door after he locked it to check it was properly shut. Woe betide anyone who was caught laughing and berating him over it. He was a vicious piece of work, who would threaten and snarl angrily and repeatedly punch the air in front of him while staring continuously at the perpetrator. With all this in mind, Martin opened his locker door and was greeted with an empty interior that smelled vaguely of some sort of ointment, but the name wasn't coming. Wintergreen, maybe? He put all his things in tidily and closed the door, twisting the key so it locked. All of a sudden, he felt something over his left shoulder, a kind of presence. The hairs on the nape of his neck prickled. He reluctantly turned his head and found himself looking at something that was shimmering and transparent, occasionally becoming more solid in parts, then back to transparent again. There was a strong smell of aftershave, with an undercurrent of alcohol. The figure was stocky with a beer gut and a grey buzz cut. Martin's stomach and chest went very cold. His heart sped up. The entity was staring at the locker. It raised a hand, and a translucent finger tapped through the door of it, 16 times in sequences of 4. I used to do this when I was alive, but now it doesn't work, because I'm not solid. It takes a colossal effort to have any sort of substance, so I can't properly check if it's shut anymore. Then its eyes turned to Martin. Evil lurked in those eyes. He was terrified to the absolute core. Then, you'll need to take over. 16 times in groups of 4 every time you lock it. You got that? The voice was disembodied and hollow, as if projected from some astral plane beyond Martin's understanding. Without a thought, he nodded his head. The apparition lingered for about half a minute, then simply vanished. He trembled with aftershock. It seemed like he'd had his very first glimpse of John Gartland in the afterlife. Hudson arrived at his point of duty one Monday night and began his routine of placing parcels on the conveyor belt. It was monotonous, but the pay was good. He was just in the process of fumbling out an earpod when he was suddenly assailed by an overwhelming smell of Kouros aftershave. He recognized it from his overabundant use of it back in the 90s. And again, there was also an accompanying waft of booze. He looked up and saw a shimmering apparition before him. He didn't look particularly pleased. Hudson stared back at the spectral form of John Gartland in retaliatory fashion. "You didn't tap the locker," Gartland grated. Hudson looked around. Everyone else was carrying on as normal. "Oh, sorry. Forgot. I was in a rush." Gartland remained steadfast. "Go and do it now. Get cover. It needs to be done." Hudson was sure Gartland had begun to sweat. Do ghosts actually sweat? Hudson was putting on bravado, but inside anxiety was rising. How the hell was this happening? Was he ill? Regardless, he shouted a manager over and asked to be relieved briefly. Replacement sorted, he walked quickly over to his locker with Gartland in pursuit. He tapped it 4 times, then began to turn away. 4 lots of 4, rasped Gartland. "Always 4 lots of 4. Martin couldn't help jumping at the sudden outburst. "All right already." He tapped it another 12 times, feeling like a pathetic fool. "Good enough?" Gartland nodded his head. "Try and not make me remind you again. This takes a lot of effort on my part, and you need to do it." "Why do I need to do it? What's it to you now? It's my locker." Gartland bore an expression that looked almost like a profound helplessness. "I can't let it go. I've tried, but the compulsion is still up here." He tapped his temple. "Your stuff in there is now my stuff. I have to protect it." "It doesn't belong to you at all. It's mine," Martin retorted. "In the physical sense, yes, but the locker I can't relinquish. You've simply got it on loan. So whatever is in it is my responsibility too." Martin turned this over. "I may just ask for another locker. I don't want this weight of responsibility. You can still tap it if you want, but I don't want this." Gartland's shimmering face morphed into a combination of panic and rage. "I can't do it anymore. My body has very little substance. My finger mainly just goes straight through. You need to do it for me, or I can't rest. I've told you this already." Martin felt suddenly frightened. This was happening. People were walking past and looking at him strangely. He needed to get back. "I have to go." Gartland drifted towards him, very close. The stench of aftershave was overwhelming. "You need to do this. You inherited it, and you need to keep my spirit at peace. Do you understand? I can't suffer in this world I'm now in. I'm relying on you." Martin ignored him and walked back to his conveyor belt, the manager asking him where on earth he'd been. Martin apologized and continued his role, his mind playing the encounter over and over. The week went by, and for the next few days Martin bore the mental strain of remembering to tap the locker. Gartland was kept at bay, but he wasn't happy. He didn't want to have to keep doing this. It was ridiculous. On the Friday night he arrived a little late, clocked in and decided to skip the ludicrous tapping. He threw his stuff in the locker and went straight to work, managing to avoid his manager, who no doubt would have had a go at his late arrival. He screwed his earpods in and got to work. After about 10 minutes, he smelled the overpowering cologne and alcohol again, and a split second later, he was shoved violently into the conveyor belt. He put his hands out, which burnt furiously on the rubber. An earpod flew out. He fell to the ground. A colleague turned immediately and rushed over. "You okay, Martin? What happened?" Martin was picking himself and his earpod up, completely stunned and sick. The spectral figure of Gartland was shimmering right in front of where his colleague now was. He was gasping with utter exhaustion. Martin suddenly turned to the right and threw up over a pallet of boxes. I'm okay," he managed to get out, slowly standing. Gartland certainly wasn't. He was staring at him with a tired fury. "I'll just go to the toilets to sort myself out. Stumbled over this pallet here. Can you cover for me?" His colleague, Bill Marsh, nodded immediately. "Sure, mate. Get sorted." Martin thanked him and walked off, John Gartland in close pursuit. "You damn well tap that locker before anything else. Do you hear me? Why don't you just leave me alone?" Martin managed. "Because I can't," Gartland returned. "Don't make me turn to violence again. That's drained me to the core, you little bastard." Martin had never felt so wretched and helpless. He went to his locker and tapped it 16 times. Gartland nodded his approval. "See? Easy, isn't it?" Then he just vanished. Even the powerful stench of the Kuros had gone. Martin walked slowly to the toilets and entered a cubicle. He sat down on the closed lid of the toilet, and for the first time in ages he wept silent tears. Over the next few weeks, Martin stuck to the OCD routine and never saw Gartland once. But he was finding it mentally draining, and he was constantly preoccupied by it. Anxious by nature, he could feel himself going on a downward spiral, and it was all that old bastard's fault. He wasn't sleeping and eating well and was jumpy at the slightest noise. One night at work, he realized he'd forgotten the tapping and ran straight over to his locker, terrified that Gartland would reappear. He got a roasting off his manager for not letting him know, but it was better than a roasting from that crazy old ghost. A few hours later, he had a massive panic attack, totally out of the blue. His heart thudded and whammed. He felt sick and detached from himself. He started to slow his breathing in a desperate bid to return to some semblance of normal. He somehow survived the shift, but didn't sleep at all that day. He rang in sick after trying to force down a piece of toast. He slept for a few hours that night and woke up with an idea so simple it was almost absurd. Why not just stop using his locker, leave his stuff in his car? A slight inconvenience, but it would solve the problem. He immediately began to feel a lot better, and his nervous depression shifted a little. He decided to have the rest of the week off, then return the following Monday. During that time, he did nothing but the essentials and rest. He was sleeping and eating better, and starting to regain his confidence. Monday night came round, and he left his lunchbox, etc., on the passenger seat. He swiped in and went straight to his work point after a chat with some colleagues. Earpods in, he got to work. An hour later, he was summoned for his back-to-work meeting. He cited anxiety, and there were no problems. At break, he walked past his locker. There was nothing left in there that was vital. He smelt no Kuros, felt no presence. He ate his lunch in his car, feeling content. His new routine was no problem at all, and he didn't know why he hadn't thought of it sooner. He guessed he just liked having a locker of his own too much. 6 months later, his car went in for its MOT. As usual, he prayed nothing needed doing, but unfortunately on this occasion, something to do with the suspension needed sorting. He had been hearing the odd clunk, but hoped it was nothing major, maybe just new brake pads or discs. It needed leaving overnight, so he had to sort a lift out. He messaged Simon Brown, who agreed no problem. Simon Brown's car was a moving junkyard, but bearable for hopefully just the one night. He thanked him and climbed out, throwing his bag into his locker without a second thought and dashing to the toilets. His curry from the day before poured out in a flood. His fault for choosing an overly spicy one. He finished up and trudged over to the belt, nodding greetings to various colleagues along the way. 2 hours passed, and he was so preoccupied with thinking about his car and the cost that he didn't notice the potent whiff of cologne and scotch immediately. The second he did, he actually physically jolted, and his heart began to speed up. "Oh, shit," he muttered under his breath and looked up reluctantly. He had never seen such an angry expression on a face, and Gartland seemed to be looking more haggard. "My spirit was so at rest, and you've just ruined it." Martin looked around. No one else looked like they were hearing this tirade. "I'm sorry," Martin blustered. "I hadn't been using the locker, so it didn't need checking. Then my car needed to go in, and I got a lift and totally forgot." He was babbling. Couldn't help it. Gartland's hands were balled into fists. He shimmered in and out. Martin turned, and in a fast walk reached his locker and did the 16 taps. "There," he voiced shakily to Gartland, who had joined him almost immediately. "Good. That's good. All is well. Don't do this to me again. Seriously, don't." He looked exhausted. Then he was gone. The next night, Martin was back in his own car, and £350 lighter. He left his stuff in there, cursing himself again for not remembering the night before to just put it somewhere else. Anywhere but the locker. His anxiety had flared up again, and he'd taken a benzo before coming in to help calm him. He couldn't afford to be off again so soon. The night passed okay and without incident. Martin drove home and was asleep almost instantly. The months rolled on. Martin continued his routine. Gartland posed no problems. He was doing okay, and things were returning to how they used to be. He was less preoccupied with the locker now, and more concerned with all the usual stuff he normally worried about. Things happened at work. A colleague sadly passed away from cancer. Some others retired, good friends he'd known for years. One Thursday night, almost 9 months from his last Gartland sighting, he decided on a whim to do a bold experiment. He simply put his bag in his locker and walked away. Heartbeat increasing, he started to load parcels on his belt apprehensively. His mouth was dry. Adrenaline swam in abundance through his system. An hour went by. Nothing happened. 2, then 3. Still nothing untoward. Martin began to question whether he had actually tapped the locker on autopilot, then dismissed it. He remembered conclusively shutting the door and abruptly walking away. There was no doubt in him. It got to break time. Martin walked over to his locker, heartbeat accelerating again. He opened the door, took out his lunch, closed it, walked to his car. No Gartland apparition berating him. No choking stench of cologne. Had he finally gone? Was this whole nightmare actually over? He did the same routine the following night. Nothing happened again. This was too good to be true, surely. The weekend came and went, and Monday night he was back in as if he'd never been away. Again, he used his locker and left it untapped. Around 2 hours later, however, he began to feel not quite right. Anxiety had crept in for no reason. He looked around. Something was niggling at him, and he couldn't place it. For a while, he was lost in thought, and his productivity slowed down on the belt. A manager shouted across, and he speeded things up, still on autopilot. Disturbingly, he began to realize the source of his angst. It was the locker that hadn't been tapped. He should do it. Had he definitely locked it? He checked for his key, and it was there on the bunch. He must have locked it, because you had to twist it and take it out. But had he really? He couldn't shake it. It was dominating his thoughts completely. He had to go and check. He shouted to the manager he needed the loo, then speed-walked to his locker. It was closed. Of course it was. But a tap would make sure, wouldn't it? He tapped it, but he wasn't certain it was actually fully shut. He tapped again. Yeah, everything was fine. Right as rain. But was it? He tapped it twice more. That made 4. He stood there in turmoil. Sweat broke out on his back and forehead. He raised his arm and tapped it another 4 times. There, no doubt whatsoever, firmly shut. But he couldn't move. He felt rooted to the spot. He began to panic now. He frantically tapped 4 more times. That made, he counted in his head, 12. But 12 wasn't safe, was it? No, sir, it had to be a few more. Had to be just right, or he couldn't rest. He raised a trembling arm again. A voice spoke up in his head and told him exactly what he needed to do.
If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, See the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,